my YouTube channel, Sewinginswitzerland. Today we're looking at hats, and I've got 3 patterns here that make maybe 4 or 5 different types of hats. So I just wanted to do a pattern review, really looking at the different types of hats that are available on the kind of sewing pattern market, if you like, and a quick review of which ones I think personally are the best, which ones are the best for beginners, and which ones are worth paying for and which ones are worth getting a freebie just through Google. There's loads of blogs that do free hat patterns, so why should we be paying for them? Good question, Samantha. So I want to let you know what patterns we're looking at today. We're looking at the Elbe Textiles Serpentine Hat, which is this one I've got on my head. We've got the Elbe Textiles again Sorrento bucket hat, which is this lined number, and then we've got the Melilot pattern company, Melilot, and this is the Sunni visor, and they also have an actual hat included in that pattern there. So we're just going to briefly talk about each one and their pros and cons, and you know, whether we'll be making some summer hats this year. So let's get started. I'm going to start in order of ease. So number 1 is the Serpentine Hat by Elbe Textiles. Price wise, it's about £2.50 in British pounds, in pound sterling. So it's cheap. It is cheap. It features this really gorgeous wide brim. It's giving me very main character energy today. I gotta be honest. So Serpentine. Then let's talk about sizing. Size wise, so I actually made the Sorrento in a medium and the Serpentine in a large. So here's a fun fact. I have a very large head. It's very, very round. It's about 23 and a half inches. So it's definitely on the larger end of the size scale here. So both of the Elbe Textiles go up to a 24-inch head circumference. And I made the Sorrento in a medium, which they recommend for 23 inches. So I just made the seam allowance a little bit smaller. This one, I went ahead and made it in a large just to compare the two and see, you know, what felt better. This one I made in a large, but next time I make it, what I would do is make the seam allowance a little bit bigger because it's tiny bit baggy there. So I just want to eliminate the chance of it flying off my head. So I'm definitely in between sizing, which is fine. It's not a problem when it comes to the construction or anything like that. You can just make the seam allowance a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So the Serpentine, how is it constructed? Okay, I'm gonna take it off and treat you all to some serious hat hair. Lovely. So it is fully lined. You do actually purchase the Serpentine hat and the Sorrento bucket hat, so you can kind of see the differences here. The differences are mainly the brim. The brim is much wider than what you get on the Sorrento bucket hat. So you do purchase them separately, which is fine because they're cheap. They come to about £2.50 each. However, they do have the exact same pieces. So included in each pattern is the exact same band piece, the exact same top piece. I mean, they match each other completely. So you could actually get away with just buying one of them and then making the brim here bigger or smaller depending on which version you would like. So you could definitely hack the one and only buy the one, but I mean, it is only £2.50, but then it is also your money and you're spending it on the same almost the same thing twice. So I think I would have preferred to spend like the £5 and get one pattern with 2 brim options, because then that makes me feel less like I've been slightly ripped off, if that makes sense. But again, it's just a mind over matter thing, let's be honest. But they are cheap. They are £2.50 each, roughly. So yes, I recommend this. Construction wise is the same for both. Now, I have deviated from the sewing instructions because the sewing instructions for both the Sorrento and the Serpentine are also exactly the same. So they are constructed in the exact same way. So you don't need really the second pattern, to be honest. So they're both fully lined there. And the instructions to make these basically say you make the brim piece first together with the lining fabric and the main fabric, and then you construct the other pieces around it. That is so convoluted, and it requires really good pressing skills, because you've got to press those edges really, like, you know, gorgeously flush. So you don't really need to do that if you make 2 halves. So you make the main fabric piece, and then you make the lining fabric piece, and then you just sew them together, right sides together, so you're looking at the wrong side, and then switch them inside out, so, or right side out. So I have actually done a bucket hat sew along for the Sorrento hat, and I've included in there actually some resources for free bucket hats, because there's loads on the internet and there's some really great ones. I've mentioned it before, but the Mood Society ones do a good one, and the Spoonflower Fabrics, they have a blog, they've also got a good one on there. So you don't even necessarily need to pay for them, but obviously if you want to support your indie designers, then absolutely go for it. So I would recommend, if you are new to sewing, and certainly sewing like on a curved seam, I would start with the Serpentine, because it is bigger. You've got that extra fabric to maneuver and to hold on to, so it actually makes it easier when pinning and that, to have that extra grip, that extra control over the fabric. Whereas this one is obviously much smaller, so it's slightly more trickier to handle. I would say, if you were worried, start with the Serpentine and then secondly do the Sorrento. But of course it depends if you want a floppy sun hat or a bucket hat. Both, I think, have their place in a summer wardrobe. I'm happy that I have made them. I'm a huge bucket hat fan anyway, but I'm really glad to have a summer hat now. So in terms of how much time it took, the hardest bit was pinning again on that curved seam and making sure that the top attaches to the band really nicely. So you do have to like clip your seams and whatnot. So that can be the most time consuming bit. I'll just try it on so you can see actually what the bucket hat itself looks like. So you can see it's a bit tight on my head, my giant head. So yeah, it is quite snug to my forehead. It looks fine. I mean, I could get away with wearing it and not have any discomfort. But if you are between sizes, do size up and then just make your seam allowance slightly bigger to accommodate for any, like, you know, extra gaping or the chance of it blowing off. So that is the bucket hat and the sun hat. I do recommend both patterns. I would deviate heavily from their construction instructions. However, I do think that you could use a free one and construct it in the exact same way. However, if obviously I'm all for supporting indie designers, I've purchased both. They were together about £5, so you know, it's not a huge amount of money. The time it took was maybe 45 minutes, maybe an hour. If you're slightly newer to sewing on the curved seam there. So it's a real quick sew, and it also really elevates outfits. So I like to match the fabrics to the garments that I've made, so that I end up with this like complete matchy-matchy set. I love a matchy-matchy set. So I do think they are super fun and they are super quick to make, and I do really recommend them. So they're big ticks. So let's move on to the next one. The next one that we have is the Melilot visor and sun hat pattern. Now I've not made the sun hat pattern because it only comes in one size, and I'm not convinced that that is going to fit the circumference of my head. And it is an adult's pattern, but I have had a little bit of trouble with the visor that we've got here. So this one cost about £6 for the pattern, and you get a sun hat, which is not at all made like these ones. You basically create, you have like a almost like a petal shape, and you almost like with quilting, you sew them together and then open it, then you sew another piece and you open it. So kind of like you're pattern piecing a quilt, really, honestly. So, and then you press it all, and then you attach obviously the brim and whatnot. So I'm not convinced that the construction, that the size of their hat will fit, and there are no size details on there. It doesn't even say that it's just one size. You just get it and that's it. So I was hoping there was a way to make it a bit bigger, but there's not. This one I love. So there's not actually that many hat patterns available that I found anyway. Obviously you've got the Elbe Textiles ones, which are pretty well known, to be honest, the Serpentine and the Sorrento bucket hat. And then the Melilot pattern, this is called Sunni, by the way, the hat and the visor are both called Sunni. That came out last year, I believe. So they are a bit samey in that if you Google bucket hat patterns, you will get a pretty much bang on version of this come up, and there's loads of free ones that come up as well, because there's not really that much you can do with it. You've got the top, you've got the band, you've got the brim, you can add some embroidered stitches, you can change the type of fabric that you're using, but it will still be the same shape. There's not really any deviation from that. So apart from the sun hat, which has obviously got big floppier brim, there aren't that many patterns, and certainly none that are shaped like the Sunni. So it's quite, I want to say revolutionary revolutionary in the sewing pattern department for hats. So this one says, so I went ahead and made the visor, as you can see. I will pop it on in a sec. It said that the interfacing was optional. My friends, the interfacing is not optional. I made this in a mid-weight linen, and it is so floppy. It looks ridiculous, and I've gone ahead and I've top stitched the whole way up that band, that visor piece, to try and add some stiffness, which it did, but not enough, to be perfectly honest. So I would definitely not skip that step. Where it says it's optional, it is not. I would go ahead and interface. Even if you've got pretty heavyweight stiff fabric, interface it. Absolutely 100% interface it. So in terms of construction, I would say if you do have any like mobility issues with your fingers, might not be the best pattern for you, because the way that we attach the tie band here, you basically sew it on inside out, flip it, press it, and then turn out these, I've not trimmed the edges, not trimmed the threads. Oh dear Samantha. You then turn out, you've only got a real small space here according to the instructions, which I followed to the letter. You turn it out and it's really fiddly, so I would definitely use a loop turner, or get some help doing that if you have like stiffness in your fingers or in your joints, because that is a bit of a tricky one to get through, because the hole that you're pushing it through isn't very big either, so it's hard to like manipulate. So that would be my advice for that one. So I'm gonna try it on. What way shall we put it on? Okay, I did actually try this, tying this on in the mirror in the bathroom, and I pulled my hair at the back and I cried. So, you know, Second time lucky, my friends. I'm just gonna, there we go. So you can see it is wearable. Definitely should dye my hair before wearing these visors, I think. So it is wearable. It is a nice shape. It is a nice fit in terms of the size of the brim, but you can see where we've got that floppy action where it should on a visor be sitting much stiffer. The other thing that I would recommend doing is next time I make this, I'm going to double the length of the ties, because I've only pulled this through once and it's very, very loose. And there's not that much tie left to pull it tight or tie it in a bow, or, you know, again, if you've got any mobility issues and you have trouble kind of reaching upwards, tying that with these quite short ties are going to be quite difficult. So I would recommend doubling the length of that pattern piece to get that size. And again, it is only one size. And the other thing worth mentioning actually is with the Melilot Sunni pattern, you have to add your own seam allowance. So they recommended adding a centimetre, I think it was, for the seam allowance. Not a huge fan of that. Like, obviously I've picked this pattern, this hat pattern. If you're making a hat, you know it's going to be quick. I mean, this was a good, oh gosh, 20-minute, half an hour jobby. Very, very quick. But the majority of that time was spent adding the seam allowance, and I find that a bit frustrating. Like, if I'm purchasing a pattern, I feel like part of that pattern includes the seam allowance as standard. Like, I don't expect to be adding that in myself, so that was a little bit frustrating. But again, it was another cheap pattern, so it came in at about £6 sterling, and you get 2 hats for that. So again, it is pretty cheap, to be perfectly honest, in terms of the price for the hat patterns, and you can make loads of these. I mean, it's pretty fun. So the only other place that I can think that sells the hat patterns is Rebecca Page. Her website has a hat pattern on there. I'm desperately trying to think of the name of it, but I can't. But that's about $10 US. So again, another cheap one relatively, and that comes with 2 brim sizes, so it's exactly the same as the bucket hat construction. When I say bucket hat construction, I basically mean with the band and the top. And then you get you get on the Rebecca Page one 2 size brims, and one is a bucket hat and the other is a sun hat, and they look pretty much very, very like these two, because there's not really that much you can do with them with the sun hat. So that is the 3 I would recommend. If you were a beginner and you wanted to make a hat, I would go for the Serpentine, which is the floppier, bigger brimmed hat. And then obviously you've got the Sorrento bucket hat, the Melilot Sunni hat. I would make again, but I would make some alterations. So for starters, I would recut the pattern to just include the seam allowance, because that's going to drive me bonkers adding that onto the fabric each time. I would double the length of the tie piece, and I would interface everything, including the ties, actually, because it's just, I mean, it's so floppy. Whereas with these are also, you know, medium weight. We've got medium weight cotton there and a really light gingham, and they're holding their own just with the top stitching there. So yeah, heed my advice for the Melilot one. And that, my friends, is a roundup of sewing hat patterns. So I would love to know, my friends, as always, are you making any hats for summer? Are hats something you even wear in summer? It gets very hot here, so actually I've never really been a hat person. I am trying to embrace it. So yeah, you know, are hats something you've made before? Will they be something that you're making again? What do you think? Here's just to re-clarify, we've got the Serpentine, Sorrento and the Melilot Sunni. So I would love to know your feedback. and I wish you all a very sunny day. Thank you. Bye.